The Skeptic Zone episode number 719 is dedicated to the memory of Jim Wilshire, our voiceover man and my mentor.
Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 719 for the 17th of July, 2022. And sad to say that my dear friend, one of the greatest friends of my life, friends for nearly 40 years, Jim Wilshire, who you hear every week on the Skeptic Zone announcing the show, died within the last week. Now, this news is rather new, so I haven't prepared anything especially, but I will probably in the weeks ahead, maybe next week or the week after, I'll have a proper tribute to Jim. An enormously interesting man, and he taught me just about everything I know about doing presenting and talking on microphones and that sort of thing. So, a very sad time here at the Skeptic Zone, you can imagine. Condolences to his family, his friends, and his many fans out there in Radioland, as Jim was a major radio star in the 1970s and 1980s. And it was a personal thrill for me that Jim agreed to be the announcer on the podcast when I came to do the Skeptic Zone. So every week I'm reminded of my friendship with Jim Wilshire. But now let's see what's coming up on the rest of today's episode. I recorded an interview last week in Salinas, California with none other than Ross Blocher from No Ross and Carrie. Ross and Carrie and I have been friends now for many years. And I, as I love to remind Ross, I was the first person to interview Ross and Carrie just after they started their podcast. A very popular podcast indeed. No Ross and Carrie, we catch up with Ross in person. Following that, it's the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, read once again by Adrienne Hill in Canada. What's caught the skeptical eye of Tim Mendham this week? Then to round off the show, it's a dive into the Trove, the treasure trove of online newspapers. And we're going to be looking at a series of articles regarding astrology. Ironic, really, or apt, one or the other, as in the last week we also had those stunning photographs from the James Webb Telescope about astronomy, which really brings home the goods, really delivers, unlike astrology. Also in this episode, you'll hear a plug for the new documentary being put together by my friend Brian Dunning, the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. And if you go to theufo.movie, you can find out more about that, but I'll be running a promotion in this week's episode. I was quite pleased a couple of weeks ago to help Brian film the little teaser for that whole project. Well, now it's time for me to run downstairs and to remember my friend Jim. I might see if I can rustle up some lamb cutlets. He loved lamb cutlets. He loved the pie, a lemon meringue pie. And he loved life. Again, a great loss. Anyway, while I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
But you can do the whole thing from an iPad. Like my friend Richard Saunders, he does his whole podcast.
Susan, stop snoring over there.
Skeptic Zone, which you can find where
I'm with Ross Blocher. We're discussing important things which Susan Gerbeck does not understand, like new recording devices. Now, Ross, how long has No Ross and Carrie been going now?
Over 11 years. Yeah, so I think it's graduated out of hobby into a full-time side job.
How do you manage to fit it all in time-wise?
Yeah, well, I have a day job, so it's essentially my night and weekend job. But it's an investigations-based podcast, so we've always got multiple investigations going on in the background.
I mean, I'm impressed. Every time I hear the show, I'm thinking, when do they sleep? You know?
Yeah, when do I sleep, Cara? My wife's over here, and
very little.
Very little, she says.
Now, I particularly like Ross because he's admiring my new purchase there of a Zoom device for recording. Susan doesn't understand it. More snores from over there. But you appreciate 32-bit float, don't you?
Yeah, we've been trying to convince Susan of the importance of this. But yeah, essentially it's a lossless format. You know, you've got everything from the input, and then later on you can go and do the resampling and pull the data that you need from it. It's fantastic.
See? Some respect at last.
You lost all your audience.
Yeah, I didn't know about the Zoom F3, but for No Ross and Carrie, we use the Zoom H6, and then we also have a Zoom H4N as a backup. But yeah, I want another smaller recorder just because sometimes you go to, say, a John Edward performance, and they tell you, no recording devices, and they want to check your phone in and everything. It'd be nice to have a...
Well, I use the Zoom H6 primarily for the Skeptic Zone when I'm in my own studio, and I hook up a Rode NT1A microphone to it, and that's why I do most of my readings from.
Yeah.
But with this one, and sorry, Susan. With this one, it means if I do field interviews and I take a couple of XLR mics, like the Shure SM57s or something, plug them straight in, no worrying about gain or anything.
Yeah, and everything's synchronized.
And look how small that is. Fits in the palm of your hand.
Yeah, you can get through the airport if Australia will let you out.
They sometimes do let me out to come here.
Now, wait, this is apropos of nothing, but I've just been curious. Can we see you in Thor: Love and Thunder?
Well, I spoke to somebody yesterday who went to see it, and they said they forgot to look for me. So.
I will not forget to look for you. I'm really eager.
The answer to the question is I don't know, because I don't know if I'm still in it or I was cut out, or if I'm in it and you blink and you miss it, or I'm in it and you can clearly see me, but if you don't know what I look like, because I had a big full beard at the time.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll just have to let you know, because I don't know.
I want to. We're all dying to know, everybody listening to this.
Yeah, me too. But let's get back to your podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, enough about this. Oh, isn't it beautiful, Susan? Look at that.
Set it up in a window.
I'm holding.
Put a light on and we'll say we'll run a.
Well, you
constant
can't get
music going.
You can't get them in Australia yet. That's why I bought it here.
God.
Yeah. I've had to buy
Who did
here.
it get delivered to? To Brian?
To Brian.
Okay.
To Brian up in
Brian
in
can
Oregon.
appreciate this.
Brian appreciated it.
Well, that's not saying much. Brian Dunning was all excited about it. Whoopie-doodle.
Anyway, now here's something that you may not know, Susan, that I was the very first person to interview Ross and Carrie about their podcast.
It's true, yeah.
11 years ago.
At the amazing meeting. Yeah, that was fantastic.
Here's some people I don't know. They've got a podcast. I'll interview them.
And we said, we like this Richard Saunders guy. Yeah, absolutely.
But you're a fellow podcaster. You know the pressures of getting a show out on time and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I always have infinite respect for anybody who produces a podcast, especially weekly, because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of pressure, it's a lot of angry emails, if you say anything wrong. So, you're always on the spot. Brian gets the craziest emails, I think.
Brian gets pretty interesting emails.
But yeah, I mean, it's really fun because it allows me to do a lot of things that I would want to do, but I never would otherwise, because I wouldn't have the excuse. But
like drinking your own urine.
Like drinking my own urine, but also like flying off to Kentucky for 4 days to visit the Ark Encounter in the Creation Museum for a homeschooling conference. I just did that in early May, and there's no way I could have justified that.
For listeners who may not be downloading No Ross and Carrie, what's the idea, and what's kept it going for so many years?
Yeah, well, first of all, I pity you, but it's not too late to get in on all the fun. So yeah, well, we're all about investigating fringe religious groups, alternative medical treatments, science and spirituality, and kind of the borderlines of what science tells us about the world. There's a lot of people making claims right on that edge or beyond it, and we're interested in trying those things out firsthand, and then we report back in excruciating detail. So like we tell you everything, like what happens when you show up at a conference or at a psychic, and what they ask you for and what they say and how they respond to your questions, and then we try to interject enough humor to help get you through all that excruciating
But
detail.
it's not just investigation. You go through all the processes. You get initiated. You do this. You do the courses. That's why I say, when do you find time to sleep?
Yeah, and they give us books, so we want to read the books, and we want to learn everything we can about the founders and the discoverers, and so. I think it's just that both of us, Carrie, Poppy, and myself, just happen to be insatiably curious and really excited when people can say certain things to your face. It's like an amazing, human trick. Like, how can you actually confidently look into someone's eyes and tell them that their dead mother's right next to them or something like that? And that just endlessly fascinates us. How do you get to that point that you can peddle this, 5G protector for your phone that we think, that doesn't do anything and you're selling that? Or do you know? I don't know. We're curious. So
I heard of an episode. I've been re-listening to some of the older ones. And there's great examples when Carrie might be talking to somebody and somebody on the other end of the Skype call or somebody says, the pennies start to drop and they say, I don't want you to use this.
Right.
And Carrie says, well, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's one of the all-time best Carrie lines. That's not how that works. Carrie's been through journalism school. She's got her master's, and she knows what she's able to do and what not. Some of her interviews with,
various mystics and things.
Shakuntali Siberia was one in particular.
That's probably the voice I was trying to imitate.
Yeah, which is funny because, I think so. And she claims to be from Siberia originally, and now she's changed her name to Madonna, which is much harder to look up online.
Madonna.
And we think in large part because she got so much scrutiny following our investigation that she sort of reformulated. We even talked to two people who were fairly high up in her organization who had left. And she changed her name, and now she's still peddling the same wares.
That was one of my favorite episodes because I thought, wow, they've really got her on the run here. That was about 4 years ago, 3 years ago.
Probably.
It's hard to remember.
Sounds about right. Yeah. Also Kimberly Meredith is another one that Carrie interviewed and came to the interview with a lot more preparation than Kimberly ever thought would go. And that's the thing, too. We get contacted all the time, as all podcasters do, by various folks saying, hey, you want so-and-so on your show? Or I just wrote this book about angels and connecting with light beings in the fifth dimension. And we'll kind of chuckle and think, do you really want to be on our show? You haven't listened to our show, have you? Sometimes we'll sort of take that bait and say, like, oh, yeah, by all means, come on the show.
You probably get the same emails I get from people who are out to publicists.
Yes.
Would you like to have this Dr. Quack and Quack on your show? He's the and
three times a day.
Yeah. Right back saying, you do realize what the Skeptic Zone is all about,
Yeah, usually I'll say, I don't see this as a match. We'll let you know if we're interested. But usually we want to tie those interviews to an investigation. Yeah. So sometimes we'll say, okay, maybe we'll look into your magic soap, and then we'll contact you later. Usually we'll just kind of say, not interested, not quite compatible with the format of our show. But the other day someone sent me, it was the publicist, and they were saying, this guy has written all this great material and has this device that can protect you from 5G and imbalances of electromagnetic fields. And so I wrote back and said, he might benefit from listening to our podcast. And I gave 2 links to recent episodes we had done specifically about 5G protests, where we'd sort of broken down why none of that is a real concern, non-ionizing radiation, but he's probably heard that before, and he's just kind of found a business.
And the publicists are just doing their job. Ultimately, they don't particularly care what the point of view is. Their job is to get the person out there on podcasts and newspapers.
If you don't reply to them for 3 days, they ping you again and then again. And so eventually you have to say, sorry, not a match. I appreciate your interest, but probably not the right match. Because you could do a whole show just entirely that, but I don't think it would be as interesting of a show.
There's an angle there. But so what's coming up in the near future listeners might look forward to? Anything you can let us in on?
Yeah, well, as we speak, I'm halfway through my edit of our John Edward investigation. I went to, and I'm finding not everybody knows who this is anymore. But
that's the Uri Geller. That's the Uri Geller. thing, right? Because
What?
when I give demonstrations of spoon bending, especially to the younger set, they haven't got a clue who Uri Geller is.
And that's why it's good for us to all stay current and be investigating the, the Tyler Johns and the.
Latest flavor
Tyler
of the
John?
month.
Wait. Now I'm putting them together. Yeah, the Tyler Henry and Thomas John, or put them together. Oh, really? That's why the Cindy Kazas of the
So
world.
John Edward is now becoming something of a character from the past, huh? A bit of irrelevance.
Just in conversations with people, I don't think John Q. Public tends to recognize him as much anymore.
John Q. Public.
I don't know. Well, John Edward, for decades, has been making 2 trips to Australia, one in the middle of the year to publicise his tour at the end of the year. And every time, every 6 months, what happens, he gets straight onto the chat shows and the radio shows, and he's been the darling of the Australian media for years.
Ross, were you
Amazing.
When we did the protest in Pasadena? No.
No, I don't think so.
With Emery?
No.
Oh,
Oh, wait a second. Well, I remember you were protesting the James von Prague. I know Paula was there with Emery when I was going to his Psychic
this
Kids
was in
investigation.
Pasadena.
Oh, Pasadena. Okay, no, I
And
wasn't
the
there.
cops came and
No.
it was like,
Wasn't there for that one.
and he had the ACLU rules, and the police had to back off because he was like, "This is public property."
Oh, wow.
And the John Edwards manager came out. They've got to go. And Emery was, of course, like, "No,
Emery's-
we don't have to go."
Emery's good at standing his ground.
He did. He stood his ground, and
Yeah.
the police left.
Well,
Video of that.
so the recent John Edward presentation was in Burbank. He came to my hometown,
Yeah.
or well, not
Oh, that's
hometown, but
asking
where I
for
live.
it, right?
Yeah, and so I bought a VIP ticket and I went, and they, very thoroughly said, you shall not record, but you can take notes. So,
Yes.
so I went, I took copious notes, and now I'm breaking down his performance.
Yep.
But also, I'm really excited about this one. I mentioned this earlier. I went to Kentucky for a homeschooling conference at the Ark, the recreation of the life-size Ark, and even ended up getting a tour of the Ark from the guy who'd been responsible for all the signage and the final, writing on all the exhibits. So I can't wait. It's going to be a multi-part investigation because I got to break down every single display within the Ark.
There's more to podcasting than just sitting in front of a microphone.
That's right, yeah. So that's fun. And there's no way I could have taken multiple days off of work, my regular day job, to do that unless I had the podcast as an excuse.
Things to look forward to. Folks, what a pleasure it is, Ross, to meet you again. I mean, we meet each other, once every 5 years on average or something crazy like that?
Just long enough that it's meeting for the first time.
It is, that's right.
Yeah. Always great to see you, Richard. Thank
Always
you.
great to see you too. Thank you very much.
Carrie, is it?
Oh, yes. Hi, I'm Carrie.
I am Psychic Ross, and I will be reading you this evening.
Oh, interesting. Well, okay. I co-host a podcast. It's called Oh, No Ross and Carrie.
Yes, I'm sensing that. The spirits are telling me it is a show about
Well, it's about
poodles.
like fringe science and
Yes,
spirituality
that's
and claims
correct.
of the paranormal.
And
you knew that.
You do research online.
But more importantly, like we do in-person investigations.
In-person investigate as well.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
See?
Me and my friend, this is so weird, my friend Ross, same name as you.
Weird.
He and I just go and try them all out. And actually, we've gone to a number of psychics. And to be honest with you, it's a lot like this. It's called Oh, No Ross and Carrie. They can find it at MaximumFun.org.
I could have told you that.
Hello, everyone. This is Adrienne Hill from Canada, here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 152. You can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all, says Tim. New financial year in Australia. Same old conspiracies and weirdness. but at least there are indications of growing distrust of and disenchantment with the supernatural, with the latest census showing that no religion overtook followers of the various sects. And you really can't lump all Christian sects into one group. And that's just those willing or aware enough to say so. Who knows, maybe that rationality will be applied more broadly in the future. We are certainly doing our bit to help. Read on. Okay, Tim, we'll do just that. Skepticon 2022, November 26th through 27th. The 2022 Annual Australian Skeptics National Convention, or Skepticon, for 2022 will be held at the National Library in Canberra on the weekend of November 26th through 27th. There will also be streaming of sessions for those unable to attend, and social events beforehand and during the convention. Further details and ticket sales will be available soon. Wakefield's latest movie, Global Sterilization. Oh, wow. Disgraced former doctor, anti-vaxxer, and conspiracy theorist Andrew Wakefield has produced a new film titled Infertility, A Diabolical Agenda, which, quote, details the World Health Organization's intentions to produce an anti-fertility vaccine in response to perceived overpopulation, and how such vaccines have been used without people's knowledge or consent since the mid-90s. The film clearly illustrates the depopulation agenda is not a conspiracy theory, it's reality, and it's happening worldwide. The HPV vaccine and the COVID shots also have adverse impacts on fertility that are being ignored, end quote. Wakefield previously produced the anti-vaccination film Vaxxed. Rabbit hole, here we come. How flat earthers help conspiracy theories spread. Apparently, as many as 11% of Americans believe the earth might be flat. The movement is using different methods to persuade people, overall suggesting that freethinkers distrust experts who use book knowledge or nonsense math that lay people cannot replicate. Flat earthers often use personal observations to test whether the earth is round, especially through homemade experiments. They see themselves as the visionaries and scientists of yesteryear, like a modern-day Galileo. Psychic spies celebrate 50 years of remote viewing. Calling them spies is a bit over the top, but the International Remote Viewing Association, or IRVA, is inviting the public to celebrate the 50th anniversary of remote viewing that should be, quote, attempts at remote viewing, end quote, to the Visions for the Future all-inclusive conference in Menlo Park, California, from July 22nd to July 24th, 2022. Menlo Park is where the headquarters of the Stanford Research Institute is located, and the place where a lot of the RV tests were done. Speakers include Howard Puthoff and Russell Targ. They coined the term remote viewing. But hurry, as bookings close July 16th. Most of the accommodation included packages are sold out, so you may have to revert to live streaming, which will set you back $100 for non-US attendees. Is sleep paralysis paranormal? This is an article that asks if sleep paralysis is a sleep disorder or a paranormal phenomenon. It then goes on to quote several people whose experiences are classed as paranormal, though it promises, quote, for any skeptical readers out there, don't worry, we will provide a scientific explanation as well, end quote. Well, not much. One paragraph among many is not exactly going overboard with science. My middle son, I believe, experienced this, and he actually thought for a long time that an alien had pinched his bottom. He was convinced it was a paranormal experience, or at least an alien one. Carl Sagan warning on lack of skeptical thinking. Shortly before his death in 1996, astronomer and skeptic Carl Sagan appeared on the TV talk show Charlie Rose and made a dire warning about how the average American's lack of skeptical, scientific thinking could lead to disastrous consequences. Nowadays, that equates to anti-vaxxers, conspiracy theories, and climate change deniers. In a society, quote, in which nobody understands anything about science and technology, this combustible mixture of ignorance and power sooner or later is going to blow up in our faces, end quote, he told Rose. Quote, I mean, who is running the science and technology in a democracy if the people don't know anything about it, end quote. He warned that our lack of critical thinking leaves us vulnerable to those who wish to exploit our ignorance. A moving, short, and prescient video from a leading skeptic, obviously in his last days. The June issue of The Skeptic magazine is now out with a special feature on pseudoscience, riding on the coattails of genuine science. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. To subscribe to The Skeptic, go to our shop to sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both. The digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. Learn more about our magazine and subscribe now. If you have any ideas for stories or want to contribute to Skeptics communications, such as the magazine or Facebook page, or just have something you want to get off your chest, then you're welcome to get in touch. News leads should be sent to newstips@skeptics.com.au. Submissions for the magazine, etc. should go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Comments and suggestions should also go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Items of interest. Boris Johnson's future. The experts speak, or grunt, bark, or throw things into the air. A Scots TV presenter used a psychic pig, I guess that's the grunting part, named Mystic Marcus, who wandered to a sign that said, "Go," just minutes before Johnson announced his resignation as party leader. Well, there you go. Meanwhile, a psychic seal, which backed England to do well at Euro 2020, just so you know they lost the final, gave his seal of approval to Ben Wallace, Defense Secretary and apparently popular with the Tory cohort. But that was out of a choice of just two. And more, meanwhile, a fortune teller, Mystic Veg, who predicts the future using asparagus, of course, has also revealed the UK's next Prime Minister will be Wallace. There's no doubt then. A seal and asparagus, if they agree. Well, that's all for this week. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill, signing off from the land of the Okanagan Ogopogo, snow snakes, and the Sasquatch.
Hey everyone, this is Brian Dunning, executive producer of Science Friction, now on streaming services. I wanted to let you know about my next feature documentary film. It's called the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See, and it's a science-based look at this whole modern UFO phenomenon. What don't we know? What do we know? And how do we know it? We're going to speak with pilots, physicists, image analysts, and, uniquely, experts in optical illusions, and give the audience a good understanding of what's actually in all these UFO videos. Come and watch the trailer, and if you like, help produce the film. Visit theufo.movie to see it. That's theufo.movie. Join me and let's make this film a real resource that does the world some good for a change. theufo.movie. I'm Brian Dunning. Thank you.
It's time, once again, to go back to those archives at Trove, at trove.nla.gov.au. Your and mine and everybody's online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia, digitised newspapers, and much more. And what fun we have diving into the trove, the treasure we find in that information vault. This week we're going to look at astrology and a series of articles and correspondence. And these all appeared in the Canberra Times in 1986. And the first article comes from the 15th of June. The Extraordinary and Bizarre Belief in the Paranormal by William Gray. Astrologers say that if you are born between February 20 and March 20, you are extremely sensitive, unworldly, and impractical, and always eager to try to escape from reality. These characteristics, they say, are the result not of constitution or upbringing, but of the position of the sun at the time of your birth. Numerologists might tell you similar stories based on numbers associated with the letters of your name. Others will read your destiny or character in the palm of your hand, or even a teacup. I am someone who is greatly puzzled about belief in the paranormal. Associations made by psychics and astrologers about our destinies, ESP and so forth, are ones which I find extraordinary and bizarre. There is, then, a stark difference between the way I look at the world and the way which is characteristically adopted by psychics and other friends of the paranormal. A very mixed bag. In particular, it seems to me that while the world can sometimes be favorable, ordered according to our designs, our best laid plans are frequently confounded by what Michael Frayn has nicely called the sheer knobbiness of things. Accident, mishap, and contingency feature centrally as uncontrollable and unpredictable factors, but not, I stress, as agencies, which perpetually dissipate the organization and order which we try to impose upon our surroundings. The law of Murphy seems to me to capture an important feature of the way that the world resists our attempts to structure it in a systematic and organized manner. The way that psychics and other friends of the paranormal make sense of the world is very different. Where I see chaos and mishap, they see hidden continuity and pattern. In this lies the basic difference between their worldview and my own. A couple of books, which I have recently read with bemused fascination, have helped me to understand the difference between the worldview of the psychics and my own. They are Bridget Pleuris' AVC of ESP and Derek and Julia Parks' The New Complete Astrologer. Entertain the belief structure of a psychic presents a difficulty for people like myself. It is a bit like attempting to fathom the thinking of a distant foreign tribe with a widely disparate worldview. I will try to illustrate this difference with the help of an example. This modest exercise in epistemological anthropology not only helps to clarify the way psychics interpret the world, it also, I think, reveals something important about the way that we make sense of the world quite generally. Suppose that someone is walking under a building and is struck by a tile that happens to fall from the roof overhead. This, I say, is an accident, a coincidence, bad luck. The unfortunate event is the consequence of two independent happenings: the walk, the falling of the tile, for each of which there is very likely, at least in principle, a perfectly good causal explanation. The falling of the tile can be explained as the result of its material properties, facts about its age, weathering, and various historical vicissitudes before and including the moment when it broke off and fell. The walk is explicable in terms of the intentions and desires of the unfortunate individual whose location interrupted the tile's descent. But to ask the further question, quote, why did that tile fall on that person, end quote, is, in my view, utterly futile. It is a question for which there is, and can be, in principle, no answer. The falling of the tile and the walk are intrinsically unrelated events. They are part of distant and unconnected or decoupled causal chains. This sort of pattern of happenings seems to me to exemplify much of what goes on. The history of individuals and nations consists largely of the fortuitous intersection of decoupled causal chains. It is for this reason that one seeks laws of historical development and similar generalizations at one's peril. And it is the same fact that makes any attempt to predict the future in any detail a hopeless exercise. There is plenty of scope for developing fairly general predictions and to provide satisfactory explanations of why various things happen. But the best we can do is identify broad trends and tendencies within a single causal framework. A great deal of what goes on is thoroughly accidental and contingent just because it is the result of fortuitous intersections of independent causal chains. Sometimes things work out happily, and we speak of good luck. But luck is not some mysterious force which is subtly directing our destinies. It is just the retrospective evaluation of contingent and unpredictable outcomes with respect to our desires and interests. Psychics, however, see the world very differently. They agree that being struck by a tile, for example, is bad luck, all right, but there are no coincidences. The walk and the falling of the tile are connected, psychics believe, not in a superficial, obvious, testable way, but in a subtle, deep, and unobvious way. Psychics differ among themselves as to the right way to uncover these underlying connections. Astrologers see such apparently unconnected events as a reflection of distant stellar configurations. Numerologists see them as a reflection of the harmonics which can be uncovered by grasping subtle arithmetical correlations. This is another fascinating aspect of the problem of grappling with paranormal belief structures. They are so conspicuously inconsistent with one another. Believers tend to be convinced of the truth of their own preferred enthusiasm and to share the skeptic's incredulity about the legitimacy of other psychics' explanations. However, I do not want to exploit the opportunities for cheap forensic triumph which psychic experts generously provide. What I find fascinating, and what is largely unnoticed, is the way that psychics are engaged in that most characteristic of human enterprises, the attempt to capture our chaotic and fragmentary experiences in a network of meanings and to discover the hidden connectedness which, we hope, underlies all the disorderly and recalcitrant happenings in the world. Despite the stark difference in approach, the belief structure of psychics has something important in common with scientific worldviews. This is the urge to discover or invent repetitive patterns which lie hidden beneath a veneer of disorder. Scientific understanding of the world has developed on just this heuristic assumption. Physics, in particular, provides us with its most profound insights by uncovering underlying and unobvious connections which link apparently disparate events in the world. Newton's triumph was precisely to provide an orderly interpretation of apparent disconnected phenomena, namely stellar and terrestrial motions. The elegant classical conceptions of Newton, which revealed an underlying system of orderly connections, eventually collapsed. However, when his successors uncovered, in the microphysical world, a disorder of randomness which underlies the classically conceived Newtonian order. Randomness and disorder are difficult for the human mind to accept. They were repugnant to Einstein, for example, who hoped to find order beneath the randomness of microphysical world. Psychics are committed to the belief that there are extra-physical ways in which happenings in the world are related, that there are hidden meanings to be deciphered through techniques and methods which transcend the limitations of empirical science. Psychics develop their own preposterous claims about the world by clinging unswervingly to this metaphysical article of faith. The same assumption, faith in underlying order despite appearances to the contrary, which has motivated many of our most powerful theoretical innovations. What distinguishes the discoveries of subtle truths from the purveyors of spurious nonsense is the fact that the former are prepared to abandon their generalizations in the light of disconfirming evidence. Australian skeptics offered the very large sum of $100,000 to any dowser who could demonstrate his or her powers under controlled conditions. Dowsers agreed to the conditions of the test in advance and failed. Skeptics did not expose the dowsers, they exposed themselves. If you want an account of psychic claims and the psychic worldview, the ABC of ESP is a representative and very uncritical source. It should be balanced with readings from a less indulgent source, such as the journal The Skeptical Inquirer. Similar caveats apply to the Parker's book on Astrology, which is the source of the absurd claim set out in the opening paragraph. The central claim of astrologers, and it underlies the Parker's book, is that stellar and planetary configurations at the time of an individual's birth affect his or her destiny. Again, readers should temper their astrological enthusiasms with sobering drafts from carefully and disciplined examinations of the subject from sources like The Skeptical Inquirer. Astrology, at bottom, is motivated by a distaste for disorder, an urge to find hidden underlying connectedness linking disparate events. This heuristic pattern-making assumption is an essential ingredient of the worldview which has enabled us to develop a subtle and profound understanding of the nature of our world. It is also, however, an assumption which can be profoundly misleading if it is not coupled with a procedure for the testing of generalizations against evidence. It is this lacuna which makes psychic explanations a pathological manifestation of our attempt to make sense of the world. William Gray has taught philosophy at the Australian National University and Temple University, Philadelphia. He works in the Department of Science and is secretary of the ACT branch of Australian Skeptics. Now, that was published again on the 15th of June, 1986, in the Canberra Times, and here, on the 2nd of July, in the same newspaper, is a response. Astrology, Order Within Disorder, received June 23, and it is a letter to the editor. Sir, I am writing in response to the article, quote, The Extraordinary and Bizarre Belief in the Paranormal, end quote, by William Gray in the Sunday Extra of June 15. The article seems to rely on the concept that the universe is ultimately a random, chaotic, disordered place. I cannot disagree with this concept. In fact, it is in keeping with this concept that I would like to make the following observations. Albert Einstein, as was stated in the article, found this concept repugnant. He said, quote, I cannot believe God plays dice with the universe, end quote. But Einstein was a Piscean. That is, he was born between February 20 and March 20. Small wonder he found reality so hard to accept. If the universe is a chaotic random environment, then it can be likened to a string of random numbers. Let us assume the following are random. 8, 8, 7, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 1, 3, 6, 8. I can assert safely that this string of numbers would occur somewhere on an infinite series of random numbers. Note, the apparent ordered series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, starting at position 5 on the line. This apparently ordered series within a random string is called a, quote, Markov chain, end quote. In a chaotic random universe, there are many seemingly ordered systems. These are galaxies, star systems, planets, life forms, etc. These sprang up as if by accident and continue existing for an apparently random period. In this way, you can be sure you exist, but you have no idea for how long you will continue to do so. Within our Markov chain, we can make statements about the relationship between individual elements that are only true within the ordered system. We need only add 1 to obtain the value of the next element. This is true until the ordered chain disappears. The solar system is an ordered chain in a sea of random disorder we call the cosmos. If certain individuals claim there is a relationship between elements of this system, i.e., the planets and affairs of humans, the true test of this validity must be observation, not dismissal on a priori considerations, like, quote, order doesn't exist in a disordered universe, end quote. Astrology is not an attempt to project or perceive order in what is a disordered cosmos. It is the observed relationship between elements of a Markov chain. This does not detract from its validity. Astrology will remain valid while the solar system remains extant. Isaac Newton, who was, among other things, an astrologer, once said to a critic of astrology, quote, I, sir, have studied the subject. You have not, end quote. I would level this criticism at Mr. Gray. Many publications that are allegedly about astrology are really about increasing the bank balances of the authors, not increasing human understanding or evolution. 1 or 2 books does not a course of study make. Astrology is far more than merely noting the position of the sun at one's birth. The science of astrology has endured thousands of years, and more recently major persecution by segments of society best dismissed with the contempt it deserves. The reign of the sort of dogma that compelled Galileo to announce publicly that the Earth was the center of the solar system is at an end. The science of astrology may now be pursued without fear. To dismiss this science as an attempt to reconcile a purely psychological interpretation without the psyche of astrologers on the strength of one publication is totally irresponsible. Mr. Gray's demonstrated intellectual nihilism is probably the cause of his inability to accept that order does occur within the disorder of the universe, unless this inability is the cause of his philosophy. I do not begrudge Mr. Gray his beliefs. I suggest there is room within the philosophical scientific environment of human civilization and other concepts and belief systems. I believe these systems should be properly apprehended before they are criticized. If Mr. Gray is really interested in studying astrology, I suggest he begin the work of Dr. Michelle Groklin and Dr. Hans J. Eisnick. Stephen Cook, Publicity Officer, Federation of Australian Astrologers, ACT Branch, Macquarie. What an interesting reply that was. And to this day, I imagine, astrologers still insist that astrology is a science. And of course, as you know, skeptical groups around the world are very happy to apply scientific rigor to astrology. And finally, from the same newspaper once again, this time on the 21st of July 1986, in letters to the editor, Astrological Nonsense, received July 18. Sir, your paper has given much space recently to Mr. Stephen Cook, publicity officer from the Federation of Australian Astrologers. Firstly, for him to air his views on the, quote, science, end quote, of astrology, and secondly, to respond to critical comments made by Ian Warden. I didn't uncover that particular item, but nevertheless. Despite the opportunities given to him, Mr. Cook has yet to explain how random groupings of stars many light years away are able to exert an influence on the present behavior or future expectations of people. If Mr. Cook had any scientific leanings whatsoever, he would accept that, apart from soul, the only influence stars have had on the development of mankind is in the field of navigation. Mr. Cook would do well to restrict his publicity to the gullible few who have joined his federation, rather than to insult the intelligence of the rest of us. Congratulations to the Canberra Times for being one of the few papers not publishing astrological nonsense. B. Butler, Holden. And I would say about that letter, where B. Butler says the only influence stars have had on the development of mankind is in the field of navigation. Well, yes, that's partly true, of course. Very important that early navigators, and navigators even today at times, use the stars, but I would argue that the stars in the heavens have had more than a passing influence on society and our development, even if it is through astrology at times, which helped chart a course for human development. So there we go, all the way from 1986, some reports and letters to the editor about astrology. And just to be clear, it doesn't matter how many times astrologers say astrology is a science, it simply is not. It does not follow the scientific method. It is largely untestable or will not be willing to be tested, or if the testing results in negative results, then those results are discarded. It is not science. But you too can discover science and non-science by looking into the archives at Trove, at trove.nla.gov.au. Don't look to the stars, look to the Trove, and you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, no matter where you are. Maybe you're in a northern suburb of Melbourne. Maybe you're over there in Salinas, California. Maybe you're up in Oregon. No matter where you are scattered around the world, I hope you enjoy the show. Coming up on next week's show in the Trove segment, I'm going to be looking at alien abductions. Have you abducted any aliens lately? And coming up in a couple of weeks, I think we have a Trove regarding pyramid power. Pyramid power! Remember that from the 1970s and the 1980s? Thank you to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone at skepticzone.tv via Patreon or PayPal. And thank you to the very generous benefactor who contributed enough for me to buy the recording device, the Zoom F3, as mentioned earlier, with Ross Blocher. In fact, I'm using it right now, and it is superb. Now, I don't get anything from the Zoom people. I had purchased this myself, but it is a nice bit of kit. But for now, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia, but I'll leave the last word to Jim Wilshire, and this is the raw audio he recorded when he did the narration for Solar Flare, the space adventure we did some years ago. You can hear that if you go to skepticzone.tv, scroll down to the bottom, you can click the link for Solar Flare, the space adventure. And Jim carries the show throughout with his narration. So the last word goes to you, my friend, Jim Wilshire.
Narration by me, Jim Wilshire. Thanks for watching.